Hi, and welcome back to another edition of the Indusoft Web Studio video training series. Today we're going to show you how to connect to a Microsoft Access database. Okay, so what we're going to show is the default configuration or the default database configuration, how you can use that in several different objects throughout Indusoft Web Studio. We'll create an Access database from scratch and show you how to configure alarms and events to log to that database, and some additional database interfaces within Indusoft Web Studio. So we've had our project here that we've built. We've got several different screens, including an alarm screen that I've got some sliders on here that I can control temperature, pressure, and some other things. So what we'll do is configure, instead of these going to the proprietary format, we will have them go to the database format. And just as a refresher, and I would suggest making sure that you watch the alarms and events video from our previous videos so that you understand how these are working. What we're going to do here is, first we're going to go into the help and explain this, but then we're going to configure the default database. So what I'd like to show here is under under database interface, built into Indusoft Web Studio, some of the objects, for example, alarms, events, trends, and some within screen, some objects, for example, the alarm event control and the grid objects, the trend control, the combo box, and some of the other objects give you access to the database connectivity without really having to learn SQL queries or really exactly how all of that underlying technology works. You can just pick it from a list and away you go. So we'll show you that. Also, since Indusoft Web Studio is web ready, you can work with databases that are stored external to your local PC or even across the web as well. So we've got some different databases that we've proven out. In fact, we've even worked with later databases than this. I want to point out here specifically, because this video is dealing with Microsoft Access, but we also work with Microsoft SQL Server, SQL Server Express, Oracle, Sybase, FoxPro, Historians. We also work with SAP in different ways, and MySQL. So there's lots of different databases that we can work with and we have used. So the next thing that I want to show is how to configure the default database. And where you go is here under the Project tab, under Options, and we're going to configure the default database that's going to be used throughout our project. Now, when we configure this database, this default database, it's kind of similar to how you might think of a default style in Microsoft Word. So, for example, you open up Microsoft Word and the font is maybe Times New Roman or Arial, and you have a size, maybe 10-point font. It's black, it's not bold, it's not italicized, and you use that font to type out your document. But then you can select a paragraph or an individual section and change the font, change the color for that particular section. Well, it's kind of similar throughout Indusoft Web Studio. We can configure the default database and use that whenever we want to with whatever connection we're working with. But then if we need to change it to a specific or a different database or a different connection, we can do that on an individual basis. And I'll show you where to do that. So here we're going to go configure the default database. And we can type in, if we knew our connection string, we could type it in here, or we can even use a string tag inside of curly brackets and define that elsewhere. To get started, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and click on Browse, and that'll help us build that string connection string for us. So here we can see a list of providers. Now, the list of providers that you might have in your PC will probably be different than the ones that I have in my PC. For example, we can use Microsoft SQL OLEDB provider here to connect to a SQL database. We're going to use this one to connect to a Microsoft Access database. In this case, we're going to be using Office 2010. with the file format, the ACCDB file format. If you were to work with, let's say, an Access 2003 database, you might want to use the JET provider. That's going to allow you to get to just about anything in Microsoft Office documents that you could get to. So we're going to stick with the Access database provider here. Now I'm going to click on the next button, and really what the next button is doing is walking you through these different tabs. So if you watch when I click on next, it's going to go to the different tab up here. So now I need a way to get to my database. Well, I haven't created one yet, so let's go ahead and jump out to create an Access database. So I'm just going to type in here Access and open up Microsoft Access. And down here, I'm going to go ahead and browse to my project folder. The training project that we've been using is IWS Training in a folder off of the C drive called IWS71. Now I'm going to store this here in the root folder of the project. This way, when we copy the project, the database will go along with it. It doesn't have to be in here, but it's just a nice nicety if we can do that. I'm going to type in MyDB and save that as Microsoft Access ACCDB. Save that and create that database. So now what we've done is essentially created a Microsoft Access, in this case it's Microsoft Access 2007 ACCDB file, but it's essentially an empty database. There is one table in here, but it has essentially nothing in it. So at this point I can go ahead and close that. And now I need a way to get to that file. Well, that is at my C /IWS71 /IWS training, and the file name is mydb.accdb. Now there's probably better ways to do this than giving it the full path here. This will work, but just to make you aware, there's probably better ways to do this than typing in the entire path. I'm going to use the security that I have associated with this. I'm not going to jump out to Windows Integrated Security. And at this point, I should be able to test this connection. If I test that connection, it says connection succeeded. If it didn't, then I would have to go troubleshoot either some security authorizations or whatnot to get to maybe a remote database. So in this case, the connection succeeded, so I can talk to that database. And I'm going to go ahead and click on OK here. We could use Microsoft Access MDB files. In that case, we probably want to choose a different provider. Just some things to point out here in this configuration. We can have secondary databases for redundancy. In this case, we have the ability to have redundancy or a store and forward. What you might do as a store and forward is have your primary database set up as a remote database that you're logging off of your local PC. By off, I mean off in a different remote location. And then set up your secondary as your local one on the runtime PC as store and forward. That way, if you lose connection with your remote database, it will store it. And then when the remote one comes back up online, it will forward or resynchronize the data. So that's something that can be done there. I'm going to put this back to primary. And here under advanced, we can see that we have some choices for milliseconds. Now, not all databases or not all data that you're going to store will require you to save the time down to the millisecond. You do have the ability to disable that, put it in a separate column, enable it, or set it up as default. And sometimes this will help create any or help solve some database issues if you don't really need milliseconds saved in there. The time difference, it will save a bias, what's called a bias for the time zone difference. So how many minutes are you off from GMT or UTC? Also here, some databases or do not necessarily use primary keys. So for example, if you were using Excel, Excel is not really a database per se, and it does not have or use primary keys. So you'd want to disable that if you were logging to that. Disable delimiters. Sometimes the delimiters that we get involved with and certain databases use have the risk of conflicting a little bit. Then you have the choice of turning that off, removing those delimiters as well. And for some troubleshooting, you can disable SQL variables as well. That can help also. So I'm going to click on OK here. And now that I have this connection to that database and I tested it previously, I'm going to go ahead and click on OK here. And now that is a default database. So my analogy with Microsoft Word, I've set up the font, the color, the size, the whole style, and now that's going to be used throughout Intusoft Web Studio. So for example, here, the history format for alarm history and events. If you remember, we have one object on the screen that can be used for both historical alarms and events. And because of that, those two, the alarms and the events, need to go to the same type of format. In this case, previously it was proprietary. We do have the option for binary, but I'm going to choose database in this case. And now I have access to the configuration for alarms and events and how they're going to log to that database. So if I click on this alarm database configuration, you can see this is the default that I set up just a minute ago. And since I have the checkbox here for use project default, it's going to go to that database. It's also going to use this default name that we put together for alarm history, and it's going to automatically create that table in the database. You don't have to use these. For example, I could click on or uncheck the default name and change this name, or I could pick one that was previously already created in the database, either by Intusoft or something else, as long as it's in the right format. But I'm going to keep the default name here. Notice this says alarm history. I'm going to go ahead and click on OK, and now I'm going to go into the event database configuration, and it's very similar, only here we have event history instead of the alarms. Okay, so now let's see how we can use this. Before you get into this default database, you need to make sure that your project is stopped. It won't let you in here. So do that, and now we're going to go ahead and run our application. And previously we were logging to the alarms folder within the project. Now we're going to be logging to the database. So I'm going to create some alarms and some events. I'm going to go ahead and give us some changes here. I'll change this sensor. I guess looking back in hindsight, you probably wouldn't have a sensor that you can change, but you'd be reading values from that. And now that we have that, I think we created some custom events previously. We get those in there if we're not filtered out. There's our custom one up there, valve open. And now I'm going to exit this project. And at this point, now I can go back and open up my Access database that we just created. And, oops, got a little message here from my laptop. Let's do this. And go ahead and click here and open up the last database that we created. I'm assuming it's the last one here in the list. Yep. Okay. And we can see here that it's created the alarm history and the event history. And if I open up the alarm history, we can see that the time and date, the time down to the millisecond, and each of these columns we call out or list in the help system as far as how all these columns are named. So we can see here that we've stored things like the values of the alarms, the user that was logged in, the name of the PC, the event time that it was happened at, and here's the bias or the offset from UTC. So you can see what that looks like here under event history. It's a little bit different layout, and that again, the columns are defined in the help system, so you can take a look at that. You can see everything that I created in there. There's our custom comment, our custom message that we put in there. And now what I'd like to do is point out a couple of different interfaces within Intusoft Web Studio. We have here under the grid, back when we did the grid screen, we chose either a class tag or a text file. Well, you do have the option to choose database. And if you choose database, which we will do in another video, I'll show you this. But now here under data source settings, we can work with that default database connection or choose our own if we want to. Also, back on the active objects screen, we have this combo box or the drop down. You can choose data sources here instead of choosing static labels or array text or a text file. You can choose database and get to those settings in there as well. Also, on the trend, under tasks, under trend, and in the trend worksheet, you have the ability to change this from database and point to an individual database. Now notice that this has trend 001 in it. We can, due to the nature of where this is set up at, it's stored in the header of the individual trend worksheet that we created. We can create multiple of those trend worksheets. So effectively, we could have one trend worksheet logging to a proprietary, another trend worksheet logging to a database, yet another trend worksheet logging to a different database, and so on and so forth. So we could really put that data wherever we wanted to as far as a logging perspective goes. We can log to proprietary or all kinds of different databases for that matter. In addition, and which we'll cover in a later video here under tasks, we also have the ability to give a named connection, and slightly different, or I guess a little similar, is we can create that connection string, but then we can give it a name, and then throughout our project we can reference that name and how we connect to that particular database. Okay, so that's I think pretty much all I wanted to show you for connecting to Microsoft Access and how easy that was. Stay tuned for the next couple of videos. We're going to show you a little bit more advanced techniques and going directly to Microsoft SQL Server Express and how to get to those types of databases. Thank you for your time. Have a great day.